The chandeliers of the Savoy Royal Hotel in London burned above the marble ballroom like a crown of fire. 300 of Europe's wealthiest families gathered for the Unity for Tomorrow Gala, an event that celebrated diversity through investment. Champagne in crystal fountains flowed like liquid sunlight, string quartets whispered, and egos shimmered in designer suits and gowns imported from Milan. At the center of this glittering universe moved Evelyn Grant. Her crimson dress is a trail of calculated power. Nigerian-born, Cambridge-educated, and impossibly composed, Evelyn was CEO of Grant Global Holdings, one of the fastest-rising conglomerates in renewable energy and tech ventures. Her face graced Forbes' Europe's 50 Under 40. Her voice moved markets. Her name intimidated competitors. But unlike everyone else in that ballroom, Evelyn wasn't here for glamour. Tonight, she was measuring character. And the man she would measure most closely sat across the city traffic earlier that day, rehearsing a speech he would never deliver. Edward Kingsley III stood in his Mayfair office, staring at the contract waiting on his mahogany desk. The gold-embossed letterhead of Grant Global Holdings gleamed back. The number at the bottom, £2.4 billion, represented redemption for 3 collapsing generations of his family empire, Kingsley International Properties. His company was weeks from ruin. Debt collectors circled like hawks. His late father's name still commanded some respect among bankers, but inheritance couldn't pay investors. Evelyn Grant's offer, a strategic partnership to redevelop low-income neighborhoods into green tech districts, was their only oxygen. At precisely 10:30 a.m., Evelyn slid her Montblanc pen across the parchment. "Congratulations, Edward," she said evenly. "Today marks a new future for both our companies." Edward clasped her hand too tightly, sweat betraying desperation beneath his tailored poise. "Miss Grant, you've saved my family's legacy," he whispered. She offered a polite smile, though something behind her eyes flickered, not triumph, but anticipation. Later, as her driver guided her Bentley through the rain-slicked London avenues, Evelyn stared out the window, her expression unreadable. "The Kingsleys built their fortune on exclusion," she murmured to her chief of staff. "Let's see what remains when you remove the velvet curtain." For decades, the Kingsleys ruled British real estate like landed monarchs. Edward's grandfather made millions during post-war reconstruction, buying city blocks and reselling them to councils at inflated prices. His father expanded into luxury development and quietly blocked minority contractors from bids through shell companies. Discrimination complaints disappeared in paperwork fog, and behind the charm of Edward's brand-name manners lurked the same old aristocratic contempt, inherited bias disguised as tradition. His wife, Madeline Kingsley, embodied it perfectly. Once an Oxford darling, raised between polo clubs and private jets, Madeline spent her life crafting a diamond-cut image of superiority. Her reputation as a social visionary masked whispered stories, servants fired for imagined slights, public donations made for prestige, charity dinners where she mocked the very causes she sponsored. She was the darling of the London Chronicle Society pages, until the night pride met consequence. By 8 p.m., the ballroom swelled with conversations wrapped in laughter and hypocrisy. Waiters, many from the communities the Unity for Tomorrow project was meant to help, moved about unseen. The air smelled of truffle risotto, heritage wine, and money too old to notice its own stench. Evelyn entered through the marble foyer alone. No entourage, no visible security. Her black gown flowed like consequence itself, modest, regal, commanding without effort. She moved silently, eyes observant but neutral, scanning the crowd. Madeline Kingsley was already holding court near the silent auction display, surrounded by her inner circle, politicians' wives, editors, minor royals. A live feed of the auction scrolled across massive LED screens. Art by marginalized artists, scholarships for underprivileged youth. Madeline's name glittered across the donor list. "Well," she said with a sharp laugh that carried farther than intended, "charity has become the new fashion. Everyone wants to feel enlightened without getting their hands dirty." Her friends tittered on cue. Evelyn paused nearby, studying a painting of a South London schoolgirl standing in front of a collapsing tower block. The piece was raw, hope and sorrow smeared in color. Powerful use of negative space. Evelyn murmured to no one. That phrase drew Madeline's gaze. She turned, startled to see a tall black woman speaking with cultivated precision, her presence unsettling in its quiet command. "You must be one of the artists," Madeline said sweetly, eyes already dismissive. Evelyn turned and met her stare. "No," she replied with calm warmth. I'm just admiring the work. Of course, Madeline continued, voice dipped in honeyed condescension. These programs do such good work for underrepresented communities. She paused, her smile tightening. Who invited you this evening, dear? The nearby guests froze, a small pause that rippled outward. Evelyn inclined her head slightly. My invitation came directly from the organizers. Oh, did it? Madeline's smile sharpened. That's odd. I approved every VIP name personally. Perhaps you're catering? A tremor of uncomfortable laughter flicked through the circle. Evelyn's posture didn't change, but something ancient stirred behind her stillness. Not anger, but recognition. I'm precisely where I need to be, she said softly. That reply, calm and unyielding, infuriated Madeline. Security, she said suddenly, waving at two attendants across the room. We have someone here who may have wandered in without credentials. Every phone within earshot tilted slightly upward. The oxygen in the room changed. Mrs. Kingsley, Evelyn said evenly, you might regret that assumption. Oh, I highly doubt that. Madeline reached for a waiter's tray, took a goblet of vintage red from her vineyard, and held it aloft. You want a parade where you don't belong? Let me show you the cost. A gasp sliced through the ballroom as the wine flew. Burgundy shattered against black silk, cascading down Evelyn's gown in rivers of scarlet. The sound of glass fragments scattering echoed like shrapnel. Evelyn stood motionless, composed, regal, terrifyingly still. And then she smiled, the kind of smile that didn't soften but promised judgment. What no one realized at that moment was that the woman dripping in wine was the very investor who controlled the Kingsleys' survival. Silence rippled outward. Cameras clicked, flashes flared. Somewhere, a journalist whispered, "This is history." Madeline adjusted her dress, self-righteousness blazing. Now perhaps you understand your place. Evelyn reached into her clutch and withdrew a silk handkerchief, blotting crimson spots with surgical poise. Then, her voice low but carrying. Mrs. Kingsley, allow me to clarify mine. She turned toward the audience, the spotlight cutting through murmurs. My name, she said clearly, is Evelyn Grant, CEO of Grant Global Holdings, the company that, as of this morning, owns a controlling interest in Kingsley International. Madeline froze mid-breath. That's impossible, she whispered. Edward Kingsley, who had been chatting near the stage, turned, face draining of color. The crowd drew backward, hungry for ruin. You mean, Madeline began, choking on disbelief. You're that Evelyn Grant? The very one, Evelyn replied. But I'm also a woman who measures character before investing trust. Tonight, I measured perfectly. Gasps overlapped murmurs. The internet caught fire before her next sentence. You mistook my silence for submission, Evelyn said. It was an assessment. Edward stumbled forward. Evelyn, please, this is madness. My wife, she represents your culture, Evelyn said, her tone like ice slicing glass. And culture has consequences. She lifted her phone. On the projection screen behind her bloomed a digital copy of the newly signed contract, Kingsley's last lifeline. Effective immediately, Evelyn said. Grant Global Holdings withdraws all partnership commitments with Kingsley International. A collective gasp like a vacuum inhaling dignity filled the hall. Madeline reached out as if to erase the words in light. You can't, you wouldn't. I just did. By dawn, the videos of the Savoy incident had collected 40 million views. Hashtag Kingsley Meltdown asterisk trended across Europe before breakfast. News anchors replayed the slow-motion moment wine blossomed across black silk like spilled heritage. The Times headline read, Racist outburst destroys £2 billion deal. Edward Kingsley woke to reporters at his gate and banks pulling credit lines. Within 48 hours, Kingsley International stock fell 78%. Employees deserted, lawsuits multiplied, partners demanded repayments. Madeline's face became a meme when privilege implodes in public. Luxury brands canceled endorsements faster than she could draft apologies. But the humiliation had only begun. What no one yet knew was that Evelyn had anticipated this months before. Anonymous tips, leaked board emails, whispers from junior staff, all painting a pattern of systemic exclusion. Tonight wasn't an accident. It was a test. Evelyn's digital security team had filmed the gala from 6 angles. She possessed recordings, contracts, and internal HR documents showing racial bias across Kingsley International. When the wine flew, she didn't just gain moral victory. She triggered a pre-planned legal detonation. Within days, regulators raided Kingsley offices under anti-discrimination statutes. Whistleblowers surfaced overnight. Madeline's insults turned from scandal to evidence. At the High Court, months later, Evelyn sat composed in tailored navy as a judge read formal findings. Kingsley International had violated labor equality laws for over a decade. Penalties exceeded £600 million. Madeline faced criminal charges for aggravated assault and hate crime enhancements. Reporters called her the Duchess of Downfall. Edward's plea for leniency crumbled when prosecutors displayed texts showing his role in covering discriminatory hiring. When bail was denied, Madeline cried, not for guilt, but for lost status. But Evelyn wasn't interested in destruction alone. When offered damages exceeding £250 million, she did something no one foresaw. She redirected every penny into an initiative named the Grant Kingsley Foundation for Restorative Development, dedicated to building cultural literacy programs and minority-led Start UPS within Britain's most excluded districts. The irony, she said during a BBC interview, is poetic justice financed by prejudice. Against all predictions, the foundation's board included Edward Kingsley himself, now stripped of title but hired as an unpaid advisor on ethics and restitution. For the first time in years, he looked human. Evelyn saw in him not a partner, but penance. Redemption, she told a reporter, is a transaction only humility can afford. The former Kingsley headquarters in Canary Wharf glittered again, not as a monument to greed, but as the Grant Institute for Social Innovation. The marble plaque at the entrance bore a single inscription. One act of hatred rewrote a system. Inside, students tinkered with sustainability models. Entrepreneurs pitched green startups. Communities once dismissed as unprofitable found a new hub of innovation. Madeline, released after serving 18 months, worked quietly at a community soup kitchen in Southwark, part of her mandated service. The tabloids called it humiliation. Evelyn called it symmetry. One evening, Madeline looked up to see the woman she had drenched in wine standing in the doorway, holding out a hand. "Mrs. Kingsley," Evelyn said softly, "would you like to visit the Institute tomorrow? Our students could learn from you about consequences." Madeline stared at her, shame hollowing her once polished features. Then she nodded, almost whispering, "Yes." For the first time, Evelyn believed her. The Savoy incident reshaped corporate Britain. Parliament introduced the Equality and Enterprise Act, requiring diversity audits for firms above 5,000 employees. Universities built ethics modules around Grant v. Kingsley. Business schools dissected Evelyn's composure as a case study in modern leadership, the power of gray strategy. In every lecture hall, footage of that night played. Crimson wine slicing through light, a woman standing unshaken, then smiling. "What are we seeing?" professors asked. Revenge or revolution? Every dawn from her penthouse overlooking the Thames, Evelyn still watched sunlight climb over the skyline she helped rebuild. The reflection of the river, once carrying the world's trade in chains, now glimmered against skyline turbines funded by her own firm. She often remembered that night, the cold splash of Bordeaux, the quiet before revelation. Hatred, she told a journalist later, is predictable. What frightens hatred most is dignity. In her office hung the framed first page of the voided Kingsley contract, signed, then rescinded, beneath a simple brass engraving. Power isn't who speaks loudest. It's who stays silent longest, until the world is forced to listen. Evelyn Grant had proved that. And somewhere in the city, people still repeated that story, about the night a single smile reshaped an empire and turned humiliation into history.